I thought my brother-in-law exploded when I offered him a job, and now my entire family hates me. But what he's really doing while my sister works double shifts is far more sinister than anyone could imagine. Should I expose him? Last weekend was our monthly family barbecue, a tradition we started after my dad had a heart attack last year. The scare made us all realize how important it is to spend time together. These gatherings are sacred to us now, a way to make sure we're making the most of the time we have left with each other. Everyone comes. Well, almost everyone. Henry, my stepsister Marin's husband, usually skips these get-togethers, always with the excuse that he's got job interviews. But this time he showed up. From the moment they arrived, I could tell something was off. Marin looked absolutely exhausted in her wrinkled nurse's uniform, like she'd just finished a shift and came straight over. Henry trailed behind her, eyes glued to his phone, barely acknowledging anyone. The whole afternoon, he stayed in one corner of the yard, scrolling through his phone while Marin helped Mom with food prep and cleaning. I watched my sister move between the kitchen and backyard, glancing at Henry every few minutes with this worried look on her face. When she went inside to get more drinks, I followed her to see if she was okay. The moment we were alone in the kitchen, Marin broke down, collapsed against the counter, and started sobbing her heart out. They were 3 months behind on rent. Henry had promised to look for work, but she'd discovered he hadn't sent a single job application in weeks. She was working double shifts at the hospital, sometimes 16 hours straight, and coming home to piles of dirty dishes, unwashed laundry, and Henry asleep on the couch with his gaming headset still on. He wasn't doing anything to help. The worst part was that she'd been hiding all this from everyone. She begged me not to tell our parents, especially Dad. She was worried the stress would affect his heart. She felt ashamed, like this was somehow all her fault. She kept saying that if she could just work a few more shifts, pick up some holiday overtime, maybe they could catch up on bills. I wanted to help them, but not with money, with work. I knew this friend, Troy, who owned a successful construction company. He was always looking for reliable workers and paid well, starting at $25 per hour with full benefits after 90 days. They even offered training for people with no experience. I thought if I could just get Henry to consider it, their problems would disappear. I found Henry alone in the backyard, still glued to his phone. I tried to bring up the topic by asking how his job search was going. He gave me his usual vague answers about having some prospects and waiting to hear back from companies. When I mentioned Troy's company and the job opportunity, Henry's entire attitude changed. To him, it wasn't a serious job, because that's where all the people who had no education or means to do something important went. I told him it was honest work, which helped pay bills and put food on the table. That's when Henry completely lost it. He stood up from his chair, got in my face, and started yelling about how I had no right to interfere in his life. He thought I was just saying all these things to humiliate him in front of the family because I thought I was better than him for having gone to college. The fact that I attended a community college and worked to pay for my studies apparently didn't matter. Marin came running when she heard the shouting. I expected her to see how irrational Henry was being, but no, she turned against me. She started yelling that I didn't know what they were going through, that Henry was doing his best, and that I was just trying to make him feel worse about himself. It was like she'd completely forgotten our conversation in the kitchen just hours before. Henry stormed off to his car, and Marin followed him, crying. The barbecue ended abruptly. My parents pulled me aside and reprimanded me, saying I should have minded my own business. Did I really ruin everything here? Should I have kept quiet and watched my stepsister continue to suffer in silence? Honestly, I don't know what to think anymore. Mom said Henry is just a bit sensitive about his unemployment, that these things take time. Dad revealed that Marin had told them that Henry was working with a career coach and had some promising opportunities coming up. This was news to me and completely contradicted what Marin had told me in the kitchen. I never thought a simple weekend family barbecue could go so wrong. It's been 3 days since then as I write this post, and I still feel sick thinking about everything that happened. Before I continue writing, let me give you some context about my relationship with my stepsister. Marin came into my life when our parents got married. I was 12 and she was 8. My dad had practically raised me alone since my mom passed away when I was 5, and Marin's mom had divorced her dad when she was just a baby. We bonded quickly, probably because we both knew what it felt like to have missing pieces in our family puzzle. Our relationship was always good. We didn't feel like step-siblings, but like real siblings who got along well. So, 5 years ago, Maren met Henry during her final year of nursing school. He was working in pharmaceutical sales at the time, earning a good salary and seeming to have everything together. They dated for 6 months before getting married in a small ceremony. I remember having some doubts about how quickly they did it, but Maren was so happy and confident that she knew what she was doing. Henry was charming. He could make anyone laugh and seemed to adore my sister. He would bring her lunch at school, help her study for her nursing exams, and even volunteer at hospital events she organized. Our parents were delighted with Maren's choice. The first year of their marriage went smoothly. Maren graduated and started working as a nurse at the local hospital, while Henry continued with his sales job. They bought a small condo, adopted a cat, and seemed to have everything under control. But things started falling apart about 2 years ago when Henry lost his job. He said the company was restructuring and his entire department had been let go. At the time, it seemed reasonable. These things happen, and Henry had always been a hard worker. Maren found ways to keep their finances from being too affected by taking extra shifts at the hospital to cover expenses while Henry looked for work. She kept saying it was temporary, that Henry had great experience and would soon find something. But weeks turned into months, and Henry remained unemployed. His excuses became more elaborate. There was always a reason for not getting a job, even when he'd been offered one. Meanwhile, Maren started working 60-plus-hour weeks. About a year into Henry's unemployment, I began noticing changes in my sister. She lost weight, and dark circles became a permanent part of her face. She stopped coming to our weekly family dinners, always with an excuse. She was covering someone's shift, she was too tired, or Henry had a job interview the next day and needed her support. Through mutual friends, I started hearing things about Henry. While Maren worked double shifts at the hospital, Henry spent his days playing video games and his nights at bars with his friends. He told Maren he was networking or had job interviews, but people saw him at the local pub in the middle of the day. One of Maren's coworkers told me they'd seen Henry's car parked outside a casino several times during the week. I told my parents all this, but they always defended Henry. Mom said he was probably depressed about losing his job. They kept insisting that Maren would ask for help if she needed it. But I knew my sister. She'd always been incredibly independent. It was one of the things I admired most about her, but also what worried me most. She would burn herself out completely before admitting she needed help. All my fears came true 3 days ago after Maren told me everything in the kitchen. But now, seeing the consequences, the impact has been brutal. Maren isn't speaking to me. She only sent me a long message saying that I destroyed months of Henry's progress and demanding I apologize to him. She says he was about to turn things around before I interfered. My parents think I crossed a line and should have kept to myself. Even my wife, who normally supports my decisions, suggested that maybe I chose the wrong time to do it. But there's something I can't stop thinking about. Maren's face in that kitchen. Everyone is acting like I'm the villain for pointing out the obvious, that a grown man is perfectly content letting his wife work herself to death to support them while he contributes nothing. I can't help but feel that speaking up was the right thing to do, even if I could have handled it better. Maren is my sister, and I can't just stand by watching her destroy herself trying to support someone who isn't even trying to help himself. But now I'm the bad guy, and Maren is more isolated than ever. Edit. Yes, they sold the condo to reduce expenses. I think I forgot to mention that. Update 1. These past 2 weeks have been absolute hell. Maren still isn't talking to me, and the situation hasn't improved at all. I need to write this while it's still fresh because I don't want to forget anything that happened last night. After 14 days of unanswered calls and messages, I decided I needed to try to fix things, not for Henry's sake, but for Maren's. The last message I received from her was a photo of her wedding with Henry, accompanied by a text saying, "You ruined our perfect life." I remembered taking that photo. I got Henry's current address from Mom. Apparently, he and Maren are taking a break. Maren's idea, according to Mom. After their last fight about money, Henry has been staying at his friend Quinn's apartment for the past week. Mom made me promise not to go, saying Henry needed space to process everything, but I couldn't just sit back and do nothing anymore. I showed up at Quinn's place around 7 p.m. yesterday. The apartment complex was a dump, with beer cans and cigarette butts littering the walkway. I could hear loud music coming from inside. When Quinn opened the door, They turned the music down. Henry appeared behind him, a complete mess, unshaven, in a stained t-shirt and reeking of alcohol. His eyes were bloodshot, and he could barely stand upright. Quinn stood in the background, visibly uncomfortable. I told Henry I wanted to talk about what happened at the barbecue, to try to clear things up. He let me in, laughing with a bitter, empty laugh that sent chills down my spine. The apartment was trashed. Empty bottles everywhere, takeout containers piled up, and what looked like betting slips scattered across the coffee table. Henry staggered to the couch and started ranting about how I'd ruined his life. According to his drunken tirade, Marin wouldn't stop comparing him to me. He imitated me in a mocking voice, saying things like, "Why can't you be more responsible like Alex?" And, "Why can't you keep a job like Alex?" The thing is, I know Marin would never say those things. She's always been very careful not to compare people, knowing how much it hurt her when people did that to her. He got more agitated as he talked. He came up to me and poked me in the chest. I tried to stay calm, but when I mentioned Marin's exhaustion from working double shifts, something in him snapped. He threw a punch that wasn't well aimed because he was drunk. I managed to dodge it, but he caught my shirt and tore it. Quinn had to throw himself on Henry to hold him down. While Quinn was restraining him, Henry kept shouting that I thought I was better than him, that I never gave him a chance. That's when Quinn, still struggling to keep Henry immobilized, started talking. He said the truth needed to come out. Everything Henry had told everyone was a lie. There was no career coach, no job interviews, no networking events. Henry spent his days playing video games until the bars opened, and then blew as much money as he could on alcohol. Quinn showed me messages on his phone, texts where Henry bragged about manipulating Marin. He talked about how she was too afraid of being seen as a failure to leave him, how he had her completely controlled. He even joked about taking money from her purse while she slept. In the middle of all this, Marin showed up. She'd been tracking my phone because Mom had told her. We all have the tracking feature activated for safety, so when she saw I was at Henry's friend's place, she followed me. But instead of being horrified by Henry's behavior or the state of the apartment, she turned on me. She started yelling at me, saying I was harassing them and trying to destroy their marriage. She acted like it was my fault that Henry started drinking, saying he was depressed and that I was only making things worse. When I tried to tell her about Quinn's revelations and show her the text messages, she wouldn't even look at them. Henry, who seconds before had been furious and violent, suddenly started acting remorseful. He began crying, telling Marin he only drank because he felt useless after what I said at the barbecue. The manipulation was so disgusting it made me sick to my stomach, but Marin completely bought it. She ran to comfort him while glaring at me. I left because there wasn't much else I could do. Marin followed me to my car and told me to stay away from both of them, that I'd caused enough damage. She said if I really cared about her, I would let her handle her marriage without my interference. The worst came this morning. Mom called to scold me. Apparently, Marin told her I showed up drunk at Quinn's apartment and tried to provoke Henry into hitting me so I could press charges. It's completely false, but Mom believes them. She told me I need to stop antagonizing Henry because he's going through a difficult time. I have proof that Henry is manipulating my sister, draining her financially and emotionally, but she's so deep in denial that she can't see it. Quinn wants to help, but is afraid of losing Henry's friendship. Meanwhile, our parents think I'm the problem. I've shown these messages to my parents, and they think they're fabricated. How do you help someone who is so committed to their own destruction? Update 2. I've barely slept in the last 3 days, and my hands are still shaking as I write this. It all started Monday morning when Quinn called me in a complete panic. Henry had disappeared without a trace. He hadn't returned to the apartment in 2 days, which wasn't completely unusual given his drinking habits, but this time felt different. His phone went straight to voicemail, and he'd taken all his belongings from Quinn's apartment. The definitive sign was that Henry had sold his Xbox with all his digital games, worth over $800. I immediately tried calling Marin, putting aside our recent problems because I was genuinely worried Henry might do something stupid. She answered on the first ring. She'd been trying to locate him since Saturday night when he didn't come home for dinner after having returned initially. At first, she thought he was just blowing off steam at a bar, but then she noticed money missing from her wallet and her credit card maxed out with charges she didn't recognize. We spent the next 24 hours in a frantic search. Marin and I went to all the bars, casinos, and gaming halls Henry frequented. We called hospitals, contacted his other friends, and even reached out to his separated parents in Ohio. Myron oscillated between hysteria and anger, alternating between crying because Henry might be hurt somewhere and blaming me for pushing him over the edge with my confrontation last week. The breakthrough came yesterday afternoon when the owner of a bar where Henry was a regular contacted me. He had security camera footage from Saturday night showing Henry at the bar, but Henry wasn't alone. He was with two guys the owner knew as local loan sharks, the kind of people who frequent bars looking for new clients. The footage showed the three of them leaving together around midnight, with Henry looking nervous but going voluntarily. The owner pulled me aside and revealed that Henry had apparently been borrowing money from these guys for weeks. So what we were seeing on the cameras was probably them collecting. Myron and I went straight to the police station. Since Henry had left voluntarily and 48 hours hadn't passed, they couldn't do much beyond taking our information. To the officer, it was perfectly normal for adults to disappear if they wanted to. Even when we showed them the recordings, they just said they would investigate once they could open a missing person case. While we were sitting in the police station parking lot, trying to decide what to do, Myron finally broke down and told me everything she'd been hiding. Henry's financial destruction went far beyond what anyone knew. He had maxed out 3 credit cards in Myron's name, accumulating more than $15,000 in debt, all because of his gambling habit, and he wasn't very good at it. The last straw was discovering he had pawned her grandmother's collection of antique jewelry, pieces that had been in her family for generations and were meant to be passed down to her future daughters. She had been keeping all this secret out of shame. She admitted she'd known about Henry's gambling for months but convinced herself she could handle it alone. But that never happened because he always went back to his habits. Just as we were leaving the police station, Myron received a call from an unknown number. A man with a strong accent demanded $5,000 by midnight, saying they would start sending her pictures of what they would do to Henry if she didn't pay. Myron was hysterical, ready to empty her retirement account to get the money. I managed to convince her to let me handle it. I started talking to this guy and recorded the call on my phone, which I immediately took back to the police. This time they took it seriously. It turns out these loan sharks were already on their radar for similar extortion schemes. They organized an undercover operation, planning to catch them when they came to pick up the money that night. By evening, they had the loan sharks and Henry in custody. Here's the twist. Henry was fine. He hadn't been kidnapped or held against his will. He had been hiding in the loan sharks' apartment, thinking he could settle his debt by helping them. The loan sharks were arrested for extortion, but Henry was released because he claimed they had forced him to help them. Myron is still blaming me for all of this. She keeps saying that if I hadn't confronted Henry at the barbecue and then at Quinn's house, none of this would have happened. She says I pushed him to desperation by damaging his self-esteem. Our parents are finally starting to see the reality of the situation, but they still insist I should have handled things differently from the beginning. I don't know what's worse, seeing my sister continue to make excuses for someone who is actively destroying her life, or knowing that Henry is still free to keep manipulating and lying to everyone around him. Update 3. Everything I thought I understood about this situation has been completely turned upside down. Yesterday morning, Vera, one of Myron's closest friends from the hospital, whom I also know though not as closely, showed up at my door unannounced. She told me she couldn't stay silent anymore about what she knew because she could see how it was affecting me, even though Myron had sworn her to secrecy. Vera and I sat at my kitchen table for almost 3 hours while she told me the truth. According to her, Myron had been planning her escape from Henry long before the barbecue incident. She had been meticulously documenting everything, taking photos of unpaid bills, saving screenshots of bank accounts with mysterious withdrawals, and recording dates and amounts of money that disappeared from her wallet. She even had a folder of text messages where Henry admitted taking money without asking and promised to pay it back. Myron had been carefully building her case, secretly consulting with a divorce attorney 2 months before the barbecue. She opened a separate bank account at another bank and had been transferring small amounts of money to that account, careful not to alert Henry. Vera showed me text messages from Myron from 3 months ago discussing her strategy for leaving the relationship. I also saw a photo Vera had taken of a notebook where Myron had been tracking Henry's lies, pages and pages of documented falsehoods. Fake job interviews that never happened, networking events that didn't exist, and courses Henry claimed to be taking but never enrolled in. Myron verified everything by calling companies to confirm interview schedules and checking course registration dates. She was gathering substantial evidence for a divorce case. The confrontation at the barbecue actually fit perfectly into Marin's plans. Vera said Marin saw it as the perfect catalyst, a public display of Henry's true nature that would help her family understand why she needed to leave. She even sent Vera a message right after it happened saying, "This is exactly what I needed. Now everyone can see what I've been going through." But something went terribly wrong. 3 days after the barbecue, all of Marin's evidence disappeared. The folder on her computer with all the documentation was deleted. Her notebook vanished. Even the separate email account she used to communicate with the divorce attorney was eliminated. Somehow Henry found everything and destroyed it. That's when the real manipulation began. Henry told Marin that losing all that documentation was a sign from the universe that they needed to fix things. He said she now had no proof of any of it, and that leaving him now when he had no job would make her look like a gold digger. But there's something worse. Henry is also blackmailing her with something serious. Vera wouldn't tell me exactly what Henry is using against her, saying Marin needs to tell me herself when she's ready. But it's something serious enough to make Marin go from being ready to leave to defending Henry at all costs. Vera believes that's why Marin has been pushing everyone away and acting so erratically. I took all this information to our parents. Mom broke down crying when she saw the messages from those earlier months, finally understanding how much Marin had been suffering in silence. Dad wanted to go to the police about the blackmail, but we can't do anything without Marin's cooperation. Vera thinks Marin might be reaching her breaking point after the incident with the loan sharks. Marin has started asking Vera questions about her old documentation, trying to remember what evidence she had. Vera has been secretly keeping copies of some of their text conversations in case Marin needs them someday. The hardest part is knowing we can't rush this. Marin has to accept everything for herself and at her own pace. Vera is worried about Marin's mental state. She says she's noticed Marin making mistakes at work because she's so distracted and stressed. For now, we're all walking on eggshells, trying to keep lines of communication open while looking for ways to help Marin see the truth. Update 4. The truth finally exploded this week, and it's both worse and better than anyone imagined. After days of silence, Marin showed up at my door at 3 a.m. on Tuesday after a shift, ready to talk. The blackmail Henry had been using against her involved an incident at the hospital 2 years ago. A patient died under Marin's care during a night shift. There was a full investigation, and Marin was cleared of any malpractice. The patient had a previously undiagnosed condition that no one could have detected in time. But Henry had discovered emails between Marin and another nurse discussing the case, where Marin questioned whether she could have done anything differently. The emails themselves were harmless, just a nurse asking what she could have done better. But Henry manipulated and edited them to make it look like Marin had admitted to making a serious error in patient care. He threatened to send these altered emails to the hospital board, to the patient's family, and to the state nursing board if she ever left him. Marin was terrified, afraid of losing her nursing license, her career, and facing potential legal consequences. She spent months paralyzed by this threat, watching as Henry emptied their accounts and racked up debt, not daring to say anything. The turning point came last week when she caught Henry trying to hack into her work email again, looking for more material to use against her. Marin went directly to the hospital administration and told them everything. She showed them the original emails, explained Henry's blackmail attempt, and detailed all his financial abuse. The hospital's legal team stepped in immediately. Not only are they supporting Marin, but they're also pursuing Henry for attempted extortion and cybercrimes. Divorce papers were filed yesterday. Marin's attorney, recommended by the hospital's legal team, is aggressive and experienced in financial abuse cases. They've already frozen all accounts and are documenting every penny Henry stole or gambled away. The restraining order was approved this morning after Marin showed the judge evidence of Henry's behavior. Our parents have helped Marin move while Henry was at a bar yesterday. She's now staying in their guest house where he can't find her. Dad hired a security company to install cameras and change all the locks. Mom has been going through Marin's financial records, helping her document everything Henry did for the divorce process. Henry tried to show up at her workplace, but the hospital security team quickly intercepted him. Even his own parents finally contacted Marin to apologize. Henry's father has agreed to testify about Henry's gambling and his involvement with loan sharks. The police are showing renewed interest in the case now that they have evidence of the blackmail. Even Henry's former boss at the pharmaceutical company got in touch. It turns out Henry wasn't laid off. They fired him for stealing samples to sell on his own. Marin started therapy yesterday. She says she needs to understand how she allowed things to get so far, how she went from being strong and independent to someone who lived in fear of her own husband. The Marin I grew up with is slowly coming back. She's focusing on her work as a nurse, where she's always excelled. As for me and Marin, we're cautiously rebuilding our relationship. She apologized for letting Henry turn her against me, and I apologized for not finding a better way to help her sooner. We're taking it day by day. Yesterday, she even managed to laugh at something for the first time in months. Things aren't looking good for Henry at all. His lawyer dropped him after Henry showed up drunk to a meeting. He's facing potential criminal charges for the blackmail and financial fraud. Sometimes I still can't believe how all of this unfolded from a simple family barbecue, but Marin is free now, and that's what matters. She has a long road ahead, but at least she's not walking it alone anymore. Update 5. I know you want me to tell you how this whole mess that Henry created turned out. Although for a while it seemed like I was the one who caused the barbecue fury, I can say, for my stepsister's peace of mind and mine, that Henry is going to be busy for a while in jail. He got 5 years for the financial fraud, while the blackmail earned him 8 years. The divorce has also been finalized. With his legal problems, it was easier than normal. When everything was presented, he was arrested because he was a flight risk, so the divorce wasn't like a normal one. That was better for Marin since she didn't have to face her abuser. For those asking about Marin's current state, I'm pleased to tell you she's doing very well. She's back to being her old self, not just because she got rid of Henry, but because she doesn't have to work so many hours anymore, which allows her to sleep more. Sleeping better always helps with depression. I think Henry knew how to use that to his advantage to manipulate her because it's much easier to do so with someone who's tired, depressed, and broken down. It's something they use in interrogation techniques to break people's will. Fortunately, Marin has had people who cared about her, and that's pulled her out of that dark place. She's also been able to pay the months of back rent thanks to my parents' help. Knowing you have a roof over your head that's paid for also helps reduce stress levels. So it's all good news for her. And for those asking, the barbecues have returned to our family. That said, I now make sure not to make any comments or suggestions. I don't want to get involved in new drama, although in this case, the drama helped Marin, so I don't see it as completely negative. At least I've gotten apologies from my parents and my sister for everything that happened. Update 6. I have an update about Henry, and I was struggling with the idea of whether to tell you or not. I'm here, so you already know my decision, but I had my doubts because of how shocking what happened to him is. He had an accident while doing prison work. Some inmates have different activities to occupy their days, and in his case, he chose to work in the kitchen. But one of his sleeves got caught in one of the machines, and it took his arm with it. They were able to stop it before it was even worse. But it was so damaged that amputation was necessary to ensure his life wasn't in danger. Now you see why I had my doubts about making this update, as it's not something that directly affects us. But at the same time, Henry was a fundamental part of my posts. You'll have to decide if I did right in telling this or not.